So it's obviously yesterday was a significant moment, one of the most significant moments in terms of one of the most anticipated budgets for a variety of sectors, including the adult social care sector. And we're here today to discuss its implications and what it means for the adult social care sector. There were some notable highlights: employer national insurance contributions frozen, national living wage up, local authority borrowing up, council taxes up, property taxes up, savings taxes up, and inheritance taxes up. The last three in particular have a significant bearing for the self-funding market. So if I could start by asking, firstly, I should also introduce our speakers. So we have Damian Green, the former Deputy Prime Minister and also Chair of the Social Market Foundation, Social Care Foundation. And we also have William Laing from LaingBuisson. And we have Clare Connell from Connell Consulting, and not least Andrea Auteri, co-founder and managing director of Elevation Advisors. Damian, could I start the conversation by asking you to give us your view, your take on what the budget means for social care and what you think was most notable about it?
Okay. They used to call the Royal Navy the silent service. And if you listen to the budget, I think adult social care has become the silent public service because the words social care did not come out of the Chancellor's lips once yesterday. And apart from when the phrase occurs as part of the title, Department of Health and Social Care, I've read through the Red Book cover to cover, and unless I've missed something, social care doesn't feature in that either. So it was, by and large, ignored as part of the consistent strategy of kicking us into the long grass. And I think you can be absolutely sure that if there had been any good news for the sector, then absolutely the Chancellor would have been trumpeting it. So that is the start of the bad news. And I think it's particularly bad in context because, of course, one of the bits of good news that the Chancellor had in the midst of all the tax rises was increased spending on the NHS. And quite specifically, as part of one of those good news announcements, there was £300 million devoted to NHS technology improvements. And given that the government has already said it's spending £250 million on technology improvements for children's care, then it seems to me even more stark that adult social care is left out of any of these goodies, because everyone in this room will know what the transformational effect of technology can have on the ability to provide high quality care. And the fact that when there are dollops of money that the government is handing out for improving technology in healthcare, it seems to me it would have been preferable for at least some of that money to go to the social care sector as well. And so the direct effect of the budget is, I'm afraid, mostly something that's not there, which is any attempt to move towards parity of esteem for NHS and social care within the department and within wider government budgets. I'm afraid social care really is still the Cinderella at the ball for public spending. So if those are the direct effects, let's look at the indirect effects. Of course, the increase in the minimum wage will be welcome for those who are on the minimum wage, but will probably be less welcome for employers who are already struggling to pay the wages of the relevant number of staff they have. And so that will be one more added pressure. And one interesting wrinkle, which you may not have noticed, is that even though, because I talking to providers beforehand, some of them were saying, well, we vaguely hope that the squeeze on local government will be eased, because at least then that might improve the rates local government can pay. One wrinkle is that the new mansion tax i.e. suburban houses in West London, as far as I can see, looking at the tables this morning, that money goes direct to central government. Although it's a council tax, that money is not going to councils, which is bad news, I think, indirectly for the sector, because it shows that the government is determined, although they're allowing councils to borrow more, as Will said, they're not actually giving them any of the extra revenue that they have been created. And of course, I'm conscious that one of the great complaints of the sector is that the money goes to the councils when the government gives it sort of annual dollop of extra money to try and keep the system running, that money doesn't come through enough to the providers. But if the councils aren't getting the money in the first place, you can absolutely guarantee there's not going to be extra money for social care. The various vehicle tax increases are going to make life more difficult, obviously, particularly for domiciliary carers and care companies, particularly in rural areas where there is no option but to travel a large distance by car to provide care services. But the one, I think, big thing which wasn't mentioned in the budget but is in the Red Book, so I feel it's legitimate to talk about it, are of course the visa changes, which I suspect will be the single biggest problem for anyone trying to recruit a care workforce over the coming years. If that becomes more difficult, then we're going to have to look at more domestic employment, and I'm trying very, very hard not to be politically partisan here, so I'll put this very, very gently, that the easier it is to live on benefits, the less likely it is that people who are outside the workforce at the moment are going to be clamouring to get into the workforce, and that will make it more difficult for employers. So I'm afraid that the budget as a whole confirms my view that social care is firmly in the long grass, and that positive action over the next few years will be a welcome surprise.
Fantastic, thank you. And William, if I could turn to you next. Some commentators have said, since the budget was delivered, that, at best it was a sticking plaster solution to some of the challenges facing the sector. But, still there's no kind of long-term funding solution that's been delivered. What was your take on the budget, and which parts of the sector do you think are most under strain?
Right. Okay. So, as Damian says, there was nothing specific in the budget, 2.4% for NHS and social care, but social care undefined. So very little indeed. So I suppose we'll expect the KC review to continue, and eventually to come up with some sort of solution. So I hope it's not too much off-piste, not to talk about what was in the budget, but what was not in the budget. And what I'd like to do today is to develop or try to express a concept which we originated, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. In fact, I remember it was Damian was there when we first put it, but it hasn't got much traction at all. So it might be new to people, but I'll explain it anyway. Basically, the proposition is that DILNOT is not the only thing that's possible, not the only thing. But there is, in my view, a sort of DILNOT light concept that could be developed. And to summarise, I think, if you look at DILNOT, and there have been 2 attempts to implement it, and this hasn't happened. The diagnosis is absolutely right, that long-term care is the only life event that is effectively uninsurable, so it's perfectly proper and right that the government, the state, should step in to offer some sort of long-stop insurance. So that's bang on, I think. The prescription, I would say, is half right. Basically, the prescription, reduced to its bare essentials, is raise the upper asset threshold to whatever figure. £100,000 being mentioned, it could be different. And the second one is a cap on lifetime costs, which were set variously at £70,000, £80,000, whatever. So my proposition is that you simply drop the cap on care costs. It is not useful. And focus on the upper asset threshold, but instead of setting it as a fixed figure of whatever it is, 100,000, to express it as a percentage of assets. So I'll go through the reasons why, if you bear with me. So why? There are three reasons, I think. First of all, avoidance of costly bureaucracy in local authorities. Secondly, avoidance of unintended consequences on the care home sector. And thirdly, fairness. So, going through very briefly in turn, unnecessarily costly bureaucracy. Imagine what's going to happen when councils start counting up individuals' payments towards the care cost cap. Very messy. What about the appeals? It will be very expensive. Two, unintended consequences, and this is to do with the care home sector, and it's a little bit difficult to explain what it is, but basically it's to do with potential destabilization of the care market. Because of the possibility of the introduction of Clause 18.3 of the Care Act, and this was part and parcel of the when the Tories last tried to implement Dil Not. This was back in Boris Johnson's time. Part and parcel of what they did in order to equalise public and private fees was to wish to, it didn't actually happen, implement Clause 18.3 of the Care Act, which says that any person, regardless of their wealth or income, can go along to a local authority and ask that local authority to arrange care on their behalf. What does that mean? If a lot of people were to take advantage of 18.3, they would all go to the local authority and care homes would no longer see any private payers. They would see public payers. And there is a possibility, quite a strong possibility, that fees would reduce as a consequence. So big issue about destabilizing the care home market, avoided by simply not having the care cost cap. Thirdly, fairness. The proposition I'm putting forward, and I think that if focus groups were to look at it, well, I wonder what they would think. But basically the proposition would be, instead of you will get state support when you've spent down to £100,000 of assets, the proposition would then be, you will get state support when you've spent down to a certain percentage of your existing assets. What percentage? Well, let's take a figure of 30%, which would leave people with 70% of their assets. That would actually, we did the figures 2 or 3 years ago, I'm not going to do them again now, but we found that that would roughly equal the cost of Dil Not Mark 1.
And turning to Andrea. Andrea, obviously, since Trump came into the White House, we've seen a notable influx of investment from the US into the adult social care sector. Do you, and the social care sector generally, do you think that the social care sector in the UK is still a good bet? A good investment?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And I think there's growing demand for socially responsible forms of investment across the international kind of pension fund community. I think, you're referring to influx of US money. We've seen that, very sizable, very public. And why is that? I think it's because valuations in the UK are attractive compared to US valuations. And also there's a lack of ability for the traditional players to compete because of idiosyncrasies with their capital structures and lack of funding on their side, which makes the landscape a lot easier to approach. Kind of continuing on from the themes, obviously, I'm not sure I can say much more on the budget, but I would say from an operational and an investment standpoint, from an operational standpoint, I think the increase in the national living wage was fairly well anticipated. I think it'll drive more change and it'll continue perpetuate the slow erosion in the local authority-driven market. The private pay market is probably going to have more resources to be able to preserve margins. And I think the changes to the immigration, they're really unfortunate. As Damian mentioned, I think that's going to be, I see the government's role to try and, if not help monetarily, at least kind of provide the right framework, and singling out social care workers for having to wait longer, to get UK residence and citizenship is just a poke in the eye. that really doesn't need to happen. From an investing standpoint, global capital has choice. The capital is global, first of all. Like the domestic capital is very fragmented and not a huge amount. Capital is global, and global capital can move wherever they want. They don't have to come to the UK. So the biggest single factor is that we need is stability and predictability. Guild market is reacting okay from the budget. I think they probably took, they anticipated some of the moves given how widely leaked every single measure of the budget was.
Including the whole budget.
Absolutely, exactly, right? So I think the market has had time to digest and react already earlier this week. We just need stability and some predictability at the end of the day. But the question of macroeconomic and political question on the UK is the single biggest driver holding people back from investing in the country.
And Damian, can I ask you, from a political perspective, how much coordination do you think there was within government in terms of, the visa changes and specifically the likely impact on the care sector, and then coupled with that, some of the measures that were introduced in the budget? Do you think there was much consideration given to that, or do you think it was just, that Labour was having to give in, make these concessions to this kind of broadside by reform, on the other hand, so toughening down on immigration and being seen to clamp down on immigration, that was a separate consideration?
I mean, from my experience back in government, indeed as immigration minister, the Treasury is always pro-immigration. It does take this, I think, slightly simplistic view that the more people you have in the country, the higher your GDP is, the better that is. GDP per head seems to me to be a much more effective measure. But from the political standpoint, it's perfectly clear that entirely apart from economic policy, the government has decided that if it doesn't get a grip on immigration, then it's toast. Lots of its MPs are toast in the face of reform. So Shabana Mahmood has come in and brought in a sort of suite of draconian measures with, I think, not much analysis of what effect this will have on individual sectors. And they're so keen to get the numbers down, and although all the noise is about the small boats and asylum seekers, actually, of course, by far the biggest numbers are legal immigrants coming mostly to work. And that's what they're cracking down on. And one of the sectors that most depends on immigrant labour is the care sector. So the care sector is in the forefront of this. And I think that would be, being candid about it, I think that would be quite difficult to reverse, because I think the political pressures on the immigration numbers are so great that it's going to be quite difficult to persuade the government to relax that a bit. And my fear is that it will take something horrendous happening, a succession of closures of care homes or something like that, or a collapse of domiciliary care in some parts of the country, before they realise that they've gone too far and had better relax it a bit for the care sector. I think, that's a piece of sort of lobbying advice for the sector. I think that the care sector should bang on about having parity with the NHS in terms of the way potential employees are treated, because if we get that for the care sector, then that will relax the current rules, and that will make a big difference. And just as a final thought on the wider politics of the budget, this was clearly a budget for the backbenchers. It was a budget to keep Rachel and Keir in their jobs. And in that, it has succeeded. There will be collateral damage, I think, to the British economy and all the things Clare particularly was talking about. But it has succeeded in two of its short-term aims. It's getting a bad press this morning, but I think Rachel and Keir will still be in their jobs by Christmas. And secondly, the markets appear quite sanguine about it. And those were the two big immediate hurdles it had to jump, and it has jumped those.
And so, actually, one of the things that I'd be quite keen to do is start bringing in the audience to ask for their views Would anybody like to go first?
Hi, I'm Harris. I'm a small provider, and I'm also a member of the National Care Association and Providers Unite, which is the lobbying group, perhaps, that you were referring to. I found this budget, as most budgets, incredibly depressing, but I'm used to that. What I'm really struggling with, personally, and I know my members are as well, is the visa issue. I think that is a massive own goal with very little care, thought, planning. It seems just a knee-jerk reaction by some children who've managed to get into Parliament. So how do we, as a sector now, coalesce and respond to that?
Who would like to field that question? William?
Yeah. Look, immigration has been a huge issue. Tap turned on, tap turned off. Fairly recently, turned off again. We still haven't seen the consequences of that. I have to say that Skills for Care, most recent data for Skills for Care, which is quite a little bit old now, shows that the vacancy rates are down to more normal levels, but that may well jump up again. So yeah, that's something really to focus on. I mean, immigration, in practice, it's had a bad press, because there are people who've been brought over and who've left stranded without jobs and so on and so on. So if it is going to, if we are going to encourage, or if we're going to lobby for more immigration for care work, it should be better organised than it has done in the past.
Andrea, can I ask you for your perspective specifically on the self-funding market? Do you think that there was any kind of reservation and anticipation of this budget among an uncertainty, consumer uncertainty in the lead up to this budget that may have changed now since people have seen the changes that have actually been implemented? And what's your outlook for the self-funding market as well in the short to medium term, given that growth rates slowing, it looks like we're going into recession. What's your outlook for the sector?
Look, I think the recession will probably facilitate more employment being available kind of for the care sector. We saw that, during COVID, where with hospitality and retail and warehouses kind of letting go a little bit, that employment force kind of migrates to the social and healthcare sector. I don't think there was much news kind of vis-a-vis the private pay sector. Maybe there's some additional kind of national insurance kind of taxation coming in 2028 from memory, based on the scrapping or the introduction of the cap on salary sacrifice, but it's pretty minor. I think it just perpetuates the divide between the private pay market and the local authority market, which is really unfortunate and really unfair. That's the underlying consequence. I think the private market will be fine. But just because it's, it just puts that requirement to come up with the funding on the families. By the way, it'll be fine, it doesn't mean it's fair. It's fair to the country. Like, let's look at other countries in Europe, for example. How can we create a more investable sector? How can we create a more fair sector? We kind of had it with direct taxation being raised, national insurance being raised to pay for older people care. We scrapped it for some reason. Germany has it. It works really well. You have multi-decade long funding visibility that gives investors like us a clear route to plan. But the big issue in the UK is that everything is left to the next 6 months. You never know what's going to happen. Today we know the national living wage is going up 4%. We don't know what the local authority fees are going to go up next April. That's the challenge, right? What if they go up 1%? What's going to happen to the local authority market?
Well, I think I remember we introduced a former care minister, and she, Caroline Dinich, who argued that one of the challenges and one of the greatest barriers to not seeing a long-term sustainable funding model for adults or for social care in this country is that whenever there have been previous attempts to try and achieve it, it's been used as an opportunity for political opportunism. So I think you saw the death tax under Andy Burnham and then subsequently under Theresa May you saw what was subsequently dubbed the dementia tax. So, these attempts to try and deliver a long-term funding model. And that's why I think, Damian, you've spoken about in the past that, the Casey Commission is going to report, I think, what is it, towards the latter end of it. So it's far too late to see any kind of meaningful change. William, sorry, just to go over to you, I know that you wanted to say something.
I just want to say something about the private pay market, because the stats that we gather show that private pay has been increasing as a proportion over the last 2 to 3 decades. And that is set to continue, barring government action which might inhibit it. The prospect for private pay, basically most people who are private payers will fund their care in one way or another through their housing asset. So the question is, over the next 2 or 3 decades, what will happen to that $1.5 trillion or 2 trillion or whatever it is that is available? And if you look at the incidence of home ownership, it's around about 70–75% for people of that of the age of going into a care home. If you look at the age distribution, then those people aged 55 to 64 are have almost as a higher proportion of home ownership as the people now at risk of going into care. So you can predict quite reasonably that $1.5 trillion, £2 trillion, huge sum of money available for private pay, will continue to exist for at least the next 2 decades. So that is a very positive message. What will happen? I mean, the budget has suggested a mansion tax on properties over £2 million. What effect will that have on private pay? Marginal. The possible impact is that there will be a reduction in the property prices in London and other areas. Will that make any difference to the wadge of money that's available for funding private pay? I don't think so. The only thing cloud on the horizon, as I said before, is the possibility of implementation of 18.3 of the Care Act, which would cut private pay.
I've been arguing for years that we need to do more to encourage the capacity of people to pay privately and to plan for it. But I also think the more time goes on, we're going to need to act on the, if you like, publicly funded side of it as well. And somebody's already mentioned the health and care levy that was introduced but then pulled. It seems to me that that kind of hypothecated tax is probably the best way to fund publicly funded care, or to put extra money into it from the general pot, because people get the point that if you are spending an extra, being charged an extra 1% on your national insurance, and it is specifically going to health and care, then that was actually politically relatively uncontroversial. Now, the problem would have been, if it had ever been implemented, the division between health and care, this permanent thing we go on. I mean, personally, I would say let's have a care levy. Let's actually take this seriously and have a care levy, so that we know that there is a sort of bedrock of money going in there. But at the same time, on the private pay issue, it seems to me one of the urgent problems is to try and create an insurance market so that we can all save effectively, or those who can, those particularly the 70% plus in certain age groups who have property wealth, can put a small proportion of that down as a premium on an insurance policy, so they don't need to worry about care costs. They will be private payers if they ever need it. They'll be taking out an insurance policy in the knowledge that a percentage will completely waste it. But we all pay house contents insurance and car insurance every year in the full knowledge that we're hoping we're wasting all that money, because we don't want to be involved in an accident, we don't want our house burgled or anything like that. People are used to this concept. I think we could apply that to care as well. There's huge resistance inside Whitehall to this, because it has a not invented here flavour to it. But I think that kind of thing would mean that a higher proportion would be private payers. They themselves would then have more choice, and also the sector itself would have a more guaranteed income stream at a level where it is commercially possible, and that, I think, would improve conditions, would improve the quality of care, and improve the stability of people's lives.
And over to the audience. I understand there were some questions over here.
I'll go with you first and then you after, if that's okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Liz.
Hello, I'm a smallish provider from West Cornwall with residential care homes, largely supporting people with dementia. The wider issue is that there was no count on the exit of people after Brexit for the EU nationals. So therefore we talk endlessly, or the media does, about the immigration, but they don't talk about how many we had to replace who were lost because they went back home after Brexit. In respect to the skills for care comment about a reduction in vacancies, that is largely because, in my view, our overseas workforce work full-time and our local workforce works predominantly part-time. So therefore, they'd have taken up 2 jobs, sometimes 3, where before we had 3 vacancies of 16 hours a week, we've now got no vacancy of somebody working 42 hours. Example. When I started nursing, it was a 44-hour working week, so I don't really see there's an issue around working 42 for people who want to do it. I had to do it for years. I think I will have to close homes when the immigration stops, because we come from a predominantly single-parent area. We have a brain drain, so a lot of our young people leave Cornwall and go elsewhere to broaden their horizons, to see the bright lights, go to college. We are left with the 3rd generation workless who are having children quite young and will now be encouraged to continue doing that because it's a lifestyle choice, as Clare said. And they might work the minimum amount. I was saying to Damian before the meeting started that we had a couple working for us who she did 16 hours, he did 24 hours, which was the minimum they needed to do to get working tax credits. They had 5 children with all their other benefits, no council tax, no, they had legacy benefits, so they had housing benefit. They were on a pre-tax equivalent 10 years ago of about £70,000. But that's never mentioned. I think the rate at which we are expected to cross-subsidise is a stealth tax against anyone that doesn't fall into the mansion tax bracket, because the house sale for someone with quite modest means is funding underspending by local authorities and governments to an increasingly excessive scale, because if a council pays £700 but the actual cost is, say, £1,000, but actually you have to charge £1,300 in order to cross-subsidise the loss on self-funders, and that's a percentage issue. It's a bit of a crisis, really, because that's not going to go on forever. And the only other thing I wanted to say is, there's an increasing market for equity release, so there's a movement which says if you don't spend it now, the Chancellor will. And the other factor is that I can remember going to a seminar, I'm sure William will remember, the International Longevity Centre doing a report on long-term care about 1997, 30-odd years ago, where they had an insurance model. But on retirement, everybody paid $14,000. It was means tested for the state to pay $14,000. Was Gordon Brown the Prime Minister then, or Chancellor?
Do you have a question for the panel?
I'm sorry, I don't really. I'm just
Right.
making a whole string of observations, because I think some of the panel have lots of valuable contributions to make, but I want to be confident everything is being factored in. And I'm sure it is, but there's always something new to find out. And I'm worried about the single parent and increasing levels of recognition of neurodiverse conditions so that people can stay home on £1,000 a week because they've got 1 child with ADHD. I had 2 and worked full time, so, you know.
Thank you. And I think the gentleman over here.
Good morning. My name is Nick. I'm from Clare Healthcare. We have a group of elderly care homes in the UK. It was really interesting to hear, Damian, you mentioned the mansion tax, money not going to local authority and directly to government. And Adrian, you mentioned, obviously, it was expected, you know, the wage rise, but we don't know what the local authority are going to increase their fees by. Prior to this budget, we basically had some local authorities that folded over, and there was a big risk of some of these local authorities folding over. Does this put the local authorities at greater risk or in a better position? Because this matters whether you're self-funded or whether you're local authority funded, because even self-funders at some point may move on to local authority funding. So it's really important to understand whether this puts them in a worse position and what money is going to the local authority as a result of yesterday's announcement. And I appreciate you also mentioned, sorry, it's two questions perhaps. You mentioned there is a possible fix that you mentioned, in terms of the levy, but is there any other forms or ways to overcome this?
In terms of the effect of the budget on local authorities, it doesn't seem to me to be very radical either way. I mean, they will have increased borrowing powers, but we've seen, as you say, some local authorities have used these borrowing powers badly and have gone bust. And of course, the whole local authority sector is immersed in local government reform and the creation of unitary authorities. I mean, it's patchy in different parts of the country now, but those areas where that's happening, candidly, that's all they care about, and providing the day-to-day services is a second-order issue because they don't know, some of these local authorities won't exist in 2 years' time. So it's a particularly turbulent time for local authorities. For what it's worth, my personal view is that in the long run, it is impossible to continue to fund adult social care through local authorities, to pretend that this is a local authority funded service with this massive excess money that national government has to put in every year. We should abolish that fiction and just say this is a national service. It's going to be funded nationally. There are going to be national rates that you can negotiate. I mean, I would carry this on in wider terms to make it easier for people to navigate. One of the problems, of course, is somebody approaching the sector for the first time can't navigate the complications of the system. They may well be doing it on behalf of an elderly parent when they live in a different part of the country, so they're having to deal with local authority. All that, have a national portal, a national system that would do it. Now, would that provide the right quantum of money? Not necessarily, of course, because there are always pressures on there, but it would make it a lot simpler for everyone. I think that has got to be the long-term aim.
And actually on that question of local authority funding and whether taking funding away from local authorities, my understanding is from some of the recent roundtable event that we had with the Shadow Health Secretary, one of the topics that came up was the kind of perverse kind of clash of interests, of personal interest between the local authorities on the one hand, who have their pot of money for adult social care, and then on the other hand, the health service, who have their own pot of money, in this kind of constant struggle by local authorities to try to shove some of the funding solutions towards the health service rather than them to take it on their own shoulders. So would simply taking local authority funding away from them for responsibility for social care address some of those imbalances that occur? What does the panel think of that specific question?
Sorry, I'm talking too much, but I'll just do this very, very briefly. That problem was meant to be solved by the integrated care boards. They have not worked. The voice of social care is not strong enough on those care boards. So if we did move to this model, you would absolutely need a separate care budget so that could be addressed in the round and not as a sort of adjunct to the health budget.
Does any other members of the panel have any comments that they want to make on whether local authorities should keep the reins on adult social care funding, or if not, then I'll broaden it out.
I say, there are some attractions in what Damian is suggesting. It's always there's the counter argument that give the NHS to the local authorities. That would probably be a disaster as well. But there is some attraction to that because local authorities do it so badly, and because there is a patchwork at the moment, and there's so much variation between different local authorities.
Andrea, do you have any views on? Right, great.
Hi, morning. My name is Auteri. I own a business which provides care for children, younger adults, and older adults. We're a fairly large provider. We're Ofsted and CQC registered. I also chair a couple of care associations up in the Midlands. The questions I have for you is around children's services in particular, and what the budget means for that, SEND and specialist schools.
Damian.
Well, I mean, it seems I'm not an expert on children's services, I should say. What they've done is they have admitted this colossal problem with special needs services, and they put a number on it, which is vast, and said they will come back with a proposal in the new year. So we've taken one step forward in that the extent of the problem has now been acknowledged, but the solution isn't there. And funny enough, there may well be a read across. It may well be that more of this has to be provided at a national level rather than a local level, because local authorities are, on the whole, underfunding SEND because they haven't got any money. And it's one of the things that you can delay. I mean, all the things you will know about people finding it impossible to get EHCPs and things like that, which used to happen in 1 or 2 local authorities, is now happening pretty much universally. So the system is falling over, or has fallen over, and the government has recognised that, but hasn't yet come up with a solution.
Thank you. Melanie Weatherly, I'm the chair of the Care Association Alliance. I think I want to take us back right to the very beginning of the conversation. We talked about a lot of individual problems, but I think our biggest problem is that we're just not there. As Damian mentioned, we weren't mentioned in the budget, we're not even in the Red Book. How do we, but we all know that if we weren't here, the NHS spending would be astronomical.
Hi, thanks for your reflections. Sivananda Siva from the King's Fund think tank. One question to the panel first, please, which is, whatever our views on it, I can't see a world in the next 10 years in which any major political party isn't going to prioritise reducing immigration over, the stabilisation of the adult social care sector. So I think that then behooves them to come up with a coherent plan for how they're going to make the sector more attractive to domestic workers. And I take the point that some of those potential workers may be on benefits, but some of them are working in Tesco, some of them are working in Asda, because that's an entirely rational choice. So interested in the panel's views over how we can make this, which can be an absolutely brilliant profession, even more clearly a brilliant profession. And then a second question, if it's okay, for Damian. So Wes Streeting has said several times now that adult social care reform hasn't failed because of a lack of good policy. He says it's a lack of good politics. So do you have any assurance so far that the government is really taking cross-party talks seriously, so in 3 or 4 years' time, we don't end up with good policy, but bad politics?
William?
Yeah, I think there is a way to tweak the benefit system in order to encourage more people into care. Not more people, actually, more hours by care workers. This goes back to the point that was made by the lady over there from Cornwall, that the immigrant workers working 42 hours and the UK workers working half that time, up to 24 hours or whatever the number is. That's something actually that could be tweaked specifically in relation to care workers to change the incentives at that margin so as to incentivize people, those people who are actually ready and trained and potentially willing to work more if the benefit system allowed them to allow that to happen. So that, I would suggest, is a real way in which the system could be marginally changed.
I would add the elevating the profession of the care at the national level and making that, just elevating it to the dignifying role that it deserves would also help. I think incentivizing younger people who want to run down that vocational track through perhaps lower tuition, whether it's nursing tuition at university, I think could be a really good idea as well.
Just a quick question on that then.
Shall I answer the specific one
Oh, right.
I was asked
Yeah.
about the cross-party talks? There has been what everyone who was there agrees was a good meeting so far, but the truth is we won't know whether you get cross-party consensus until we see what Louise Casey says. I assume the idea is, because she's reporting so close to the next election, that she will come up with something that every party will endorse and sort of stare each other in the face and dare them not to endorse it. That's clearly the plan. Whether that will work or not, what the political climate will be like in 2028, who knows? So I'm afraid the jury is out on that. And just quickly, what can the sector do to get its voice across better? The simplest thing would be to form a trade body. There are loads of really good organisations out there. But I'm told that Stephen Kinnock, when he took over as care minister, said, the care sector, who do I phone? The old Henry Kissinger question about who do I phone to talk to Europe. who do you phone to talk to the care sector? There are lots of very, very good people running very, very good organisations, but it seems to me quite simply that there needs to be an overall trade body for care, and that would make its voice much more powerful.
It's called the Care Provider Alliance. The problem is the chair changes every year, and therefore as soon as the minister gets to work out who to talk to, all of us belong to that organisation, they move. So maybe the simple solution is that we don't have a revolving chair. The alliance exists. It covers everybody from Care England, NCA, everybody. But the chair changes. They've just got used to, oh, I speak to Vic. Oh, no, you don't anymore. You now speak to Ewan. No, you don't anymore. You now speak to Nardra. So maybe it's as simple as having one person who works for all of us. Thank you. That's a really, really helpful, something we could probably afford to do.
I'm conscious of time, but if anybody has any kind of burning questions.
You can't cover domiciliary care at 10 o'clock at night and ask someone to come out in the middle of the night and leave their children behind, and you can't cover night shift. The people who the government wants to get back into work probably largely want school hours.
Yeah.
I have one last question for Andrea, actually. Andrea, my understanding is that you invest all over Europe. Are there any lessons or insights that you can share from other European countries, that lessons that we might learn here in the UK?
I'll go back to what I said earlier. Germany has got multi-decade long visibility on funding for care, which is raised centrally and then distributed into the regions. I think that's single-handedly kind of the easiest way to plan for funding and therefore give visibility to investors who need at least a 3 to 5 year outlook.
Damian, how difficult would it be to wrestle funding pots away from local authorities and to centralise it instead?
I mean, the Treasury is an all-powerful institution. It could do it by the stroke of a pen. And possibly the passage of legislation, but this government has a huge majority to pass legislation. So, I mean, it's a hell of a decision, and I get the point. But funnily enough, literally in my decade in politics, the only time I ever suggested tentatively to local councillors that maybe you should give this up, the only time I didn't get sort of things thrown at me was when I suggested maybe first-tier authorities should not be doing adult social care. And a lot of people said, yeah, absolutely, it's bankrupting us. You know, we are going to be basically funding adult social care and maybe at the edge filling in a few potholes and running a smaller and smaller number of libraries. Local government is going to disappear under the weight of funding adult social care unless we do something about it. So even local councillors were prepared to contemplate this change.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming. I hope that you all found the discussion useful and worthwhile. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.